Welcome back, everybody. Our next presenter is Dr. Rebecca Hardcastle. I don't know her too well yet. Back to the introduction. She's here because of this book. This book, Exoconsciousness, Your 21st Century Mind. I was privileged to get sent the first chapter of it before it was done. Actually, it went a little bit, a couple of pages into the second chapter. Guys, I didn't want to stop reading it. It was just absolutely fabulous. And that's why she's here. I asked her to sum it up, I said, hey, sum up this book for everybody. And she said, you know what, Bob? It's the peanut butter and jelly version of quantum physics. Listen, it's going to be a trip. It's going to be fun. Please welcome Rebecca Hardcastle.
Thank you. Oh, that was perfect. Thank you. Oh, can I keep my book? There you go. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's just such a pleasure to be here, and your sandwiches are all ready for your lunches. It's such a joy to be here at this conference. I've thought about coming to this conference for 8 or 9 years, and finally it's all happening, and it's just such a joy to be around the Brown family with Heather and Nikki and Bob. So thank you very, very much, and all the people that are behind the scenes making this possible. I chose this day as the release for my book, Exoconsciousness, and then the synchronicities started to happen in the unfolding of the launch of this book. Michael Salla was up here launching his book, and ironically, I wrote the spine of Exoconsciousness on the Big Island where Michael and Angelica live. And of course, being an author, I already knew what I was going to write about, so I decided I was going to go to Hilo. A friend of mine offered me his garden apartment, so I was going to go for 3 weeks and write Exoconsciousness, and I had everything all outlined, and I got there and was struck by the aloha spirit, and there went my good plans. So Exoconsciousness turned out to be something totally different than I ever planned to write. So I hope you enjoy it. I enjoyed writing it. It was an unfolding as the process went. So I'll be out here after the presentation and would love to meet you. What is exoconsciousness? Exoconsciousness is a concept that I was literally gifted with and given. I was lying in bed one morning when you're in that really nice phase between trance states are really easy to obtain because you're half asleep, half awake. And all of a sudden, this whole concept of exoconsciousness was just gently and lovingly laid in my mind. And so as it grew, it became the way to talk about the extraterrestrial origins, dimensions, and abilities of our human consciousness. Now, why is exoconsciousness important? Well, for a couple reasons. One of the purposes that I have in bringing this forward to people and talking and writing about it and sharing my experiences is because a lot of people are very perhaps threatened by talking about their experiences, or they don't really have a way to integrate their experiences into their everyday life. Here I am, raising children, or I have a career, or I have something, an important project that I'm working on, and how in heaven's name do I talk about exoconsciousness amidst all that? And so that's one of the main reasons, is to integrate consciousness and extraterrestrial consciousness in a very gentle, easy manner of everyday life. The second reason I wanted to do it is because the best example of it is an email that I got this week from a friend. And he sent me an email, and the email was about, I think it was from Renz.com, Jeff Renz site, and he was writing about Tibetan Buddhist monks who do remote viewing, and how remote viewing had always been a part of their tradition, and that they were sharing with the world some of the remote viewing that they were seeing for 2012. And so the article went on and said that we were going toward 2012, and the Tibetan Buddhist monks felt that we were going to have a kind of a superpower collision, and that as a result of this superpower collision, we were going to have an intervention of extraterrestrials to come and save us. And all I could see was, did you ever go to Sunday school or church school and you got those little papers with, you know, the pictures of Jesus on them, or the picture of the hand of God reaching down? I thought, oh my goodness, that is all I could see. And something inside of me just said, you know, I hope the ETs do show up. I would love that to happen. But really what I want to have happen is for all of us to realize that we're this person right inside here. That's who we are. We are ETs. And we have an extraterrestrial consciousness. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today are historical perspectives of consciousness. I thought I'd give you a little bar banter when you're maybe out to dinner or whatever, somebody brings up consciousness, you can say, oh yeah, did you know that? We'll just kind of talk about the historical perspective a little bit. The philosophical perspective, talk a little bit, as I said, the peanut butter and jelly version of quantum consciousness, what cultural shifts have happened to bring exoconsciousness into the fore. And then kind of the meat of the presentation is what I've learned as an experiencer about trauma and how trauma affects all of us. And talk a little bit about DNA and how can we move our DNA such that we can become an evolved species, what are our exoconscious abilities, what is psychic intelligence, and then what is extraterrestrial reality. So if you can just take a minute, since we're talking about consciousness, just kind of uncross your hands and feet and just you know, maybe put both your feet on the ground and just kind of anchor yourself on this planet, I like to say. Just anchor yourself for a minute on this planet and just close your eyes if you want to, or look at the visuals if you want to. And just take a moment and think about why you are here today on this blue-green planet. And what are you open to learn? And then I want you to feel this in your mind and your body and your emotions. What wisdom dwells deep in your consciousness? What wisdom dwells deep in your body? And in your emotions. And we've seen this visual a couple times this week, but in what galactic fields does your consciousness connect? And finally, who are you in relationship to these connections? Thank you. And so the next question is, who am I and why am I up here talking? I came to this conference this week with Ruth Hover. I'm sure that many of you know Ruth Hover. Ruth Hover's been in the field of extraterrestrial studies since the 1950s. She is an amazing woman. She is running currently the longest running or the longest standing experiencer group in the nation in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm a proud member of that experiencer group. Ruth has been my mentor. She's loaned me her library. She had to leave the conference today because of a family emergency, but you know, this talk is really dedicated to Ruth and what she's been in my life. The other person that has really been very, very important in my life is Paulo Harris. In 2005, I taught an extraterrestrial reality course at Scottsdale Community College. You'll hear that word extraterrestrial reality quite a bit because I really like to use that term. And Paulo Harris heard that I was teaching this class, maybe a press release or something, I'm not quite sure how she heard, but all of a sudden, a friend of mine's in Washington, D.C. called me going, Rebecca, Paulo Harris is on Coast to Coast talking about a course you're teaching. So she really picks up whatever is happening and whatever is moving in our whole, this whole exopolitics realm, and runs with it and acclaims it. And extraterrestrial curriculums in middle schools, high schools, and universities, it's going to happen. I also teach at the Exopolitics Institute with Michael Sala and Paulo Harris. I teach Exoconsciousness and From Mars to Egypt through that Exoconsciousness Institute. In terms of exopolitics, I'm very, very active in the Exopolitics Institute, and I wanted to just let people know that I learned this afternoon that, as a matter of fact, I believe Edgar Mitchell was on the Charlie Rose show just yesterday. I'm sorry, John Podesta was on the Charlie Rose show just yesterday, and John Podesta brought up the word and used the word disclosure. He started talking about disclosure and the need for disclosure because of transparency in government. Now, if John Podesta is using our language, I think disclosure of the extraterrestrial reality is the next thing that's going to happen. So all of you UFO examiners, I think you'll be, get your laptops open and write that next UFO examiner quote and get that quote from John Podesta, because that's really how disclosure is going to happen. People just drop, like John Dean talked about, little leaks here and there. I think that was a pretty big leak, actually. I'm also a member of the Phoenix Lights 3 with, do you want to stand? With Terry Mansfield, Arizona Department of Peace, and Lynn Kitai, the Phoenix Lights. The three of us are having so much fun together. Lynn is the Phoenix Lights, Terry's Peace, and I'm the Paranormal. So it's a real nice coming together of the three of us. We are also very privileged as three women to be working with Edgar Mitchell's nonprofit, Quantrex, and to be working with physicists and bringing the whole experiential contactee, UFO investigator into that next generation of technology that Edgar and some of the physicists are also working on. So we're very, very fortunate to be doing that. We also, being three women, we had to have a baby. So we birthed this baby called E.T. Vote Now on July 4th. We thought, the birth of our nation, what a better time to have a baby. So we birthed E.T. Vote Now, and we're asking for a Department of Extraterrestrial Alliances. And what we want is open diplomatic relationships between extraterrestrial races and Earth, where Hillary Clinton or whomever would go in a public arena and talk about what extraterrestrials that she is working with and what treaties and agreements, so that this whole situation that Michael Sala was talking about the other day in terms of Eisenhower in 1954, that would all be brought then into the open in regular diplomacy channels. So please take time to visit that website. Who am I? I love Martin Luther King when he talked about the civil rights movement, and he kept referring to the group as, "You are my beloved community." And I really feel like being here this week, I was just so honored to be among you, to listen to your stories, to listen to the books that you read, to listen to your experiences, to listen to all of your wisdom. We are really a beloved community, and I just thank everyone that I've met. So let's talk a little bit about consciousness, because exoconsciousness has to do with what is consciousness. If we're going to talk about extraterrestrial origins of consciousness, we need to have some kind of focus to talk about what exactly are the academics and the scientists talking about when they talk about consciousness. Well, let's just go back a little bit, because when I first started working in the field of consciousness, it was rather amorphous. It was difficult to get a hold of, and so the route I decided I would go was I would just start experimenting with my consciousness. I would get books on astral travel, I went to websites, I taught myself how to remote view. Whatever consciousness ability was there, I was the first one to teach me how to use it. Okay, I'll try that. And so I was having this huge experience of consciousness And this whole consciousness cord within my body was getting stronger, and it was so exciting. And then I would go back and, like this diligent, student, open the books and start reading the books. And there began to be a little bit of a disconnect between what I was experiencing in this multidimensional consciousness, or my contact with extraterrestrials, and what I was experiencing as I read these books on consciousness. And so I started looking back into history, and what I found out was that Western academic history, in Western academic history, consciousness is defined and to some extent limited by constructive models of brain-based technology. So whatever the technology of the day was, that was how they talked about their mind. So, if we start here in early Alexandria, Galen, of course, at that time, there was still a nice connection between the divine and the human body. So Galen starts talking about the brain, or is the home of the rational soul. It's filled with empty spaces called ventricles. Ventricles are filled with ethereal spirit. And in truth, what he's talking about in consciousness in early Alexandria is really not unlike a little bit of what we're talking about, because of the whole blending now of spirituality and science. But then we go to Descartes. Thank you very much for separating my mind from my body. So Descartes in the 17th century came up with this mechanical model, and he's still a little bit into the divine, because he starts talking about the brain being a pipe organ, which is a very kind of a sacred instrument that we use in churches and that sort of thing. So the air in our brain and in our bodies moves through this artery system of the heart and the brain. The early 20th century, of course, Freud, if you think about the times that Freud lived in, steam locomotives were the real thing of the day. Steam-driven boats, steam-driven cruise liners and vessels, and steam engines and hydraulics were the technology of the day. And so he thought that the mind was similar to the hydraulic system or the steam engine. And then we come to the mid-20th century and the behaviorists. I love this one. You know what? We still use this model of consciousness. The brain is a sophisticated telephone switchboard. Optimal functioning equals signals routed correctly. How many pharmaceutical ads have you seen that say, your brain signals just aren't functioning correctly? You know, you need to take this drug. And they're still talking about the brain like a switchboard. So then we go into World War I and World War II, and Joe Farrell showed us that really great picture of second generation Nazi Germany and what the computer looked like. And so that supposedly Hitler and his military complex was using a computer. So during World War I and World War II, we talk about the mind as an organism. There's very process oriented. That information is an interaction between objects. And then to the late 20th century, certainly Raymond Kurzweil, I'm sure a lot of you go on his website and read his information. Artificial intelligence is really big. Steven Spielberg makes the movie Artificial Intelligence, and we begin to see the brain as a very high technology elite computer. And if you ask most people today, most scientists, most physicians, most academic people, we still are talking about the brain as a computer. So the brain is maybe now a laptop, and the neurons and the synapses are the bits and the switches. So we still are limiting our consciousness by our technology. So consciousness then is computation of these bits and switches. And then let's talk a little bit about contemporary philosophy. I have a philosophical background, so I just always like to look at what philosophical thinkers are really talking about in terms of consciousness, because I thought if there's one place outside of science and medicine that would be talking about consciousness, it would certainly be contemporary philosophy. Well, I come upon this wonderful man named David Chalmers, who in 1994, I believe he was teaching at University of Arizona. He's since then, I believe, gone to Australia to teach. He makes this pronouncement at this academic gathering in Tucson, Arizona in 1994, and just kind of stuns the philosophical world. I don't know, I've been to philosophical conferences. I don't know if they get stunned, but it seemed to create some kind of an uproar among papers published afterwards or something. But what he claimed was that consciousness, philosophically, we've already solved the easy problem. We know the brain's ability to categorize, discriminate, and control behavior. So that problem we can just pick up and set aside. Now, it's interesting, if you've read the information that was coming out just recently from NSA, and there's supposedly this big supercomputer at College Park in Maryland, and is supposedly collecting all of our text messages and cell phone conversations and emails and documents that we create on the computer, and they're putting together from bits and pieces of this. They're trying to ask really sophisticated questions of all this data that they're gathering, so they can figure out, you know, who really is this Rebecca Hardcastle, and what does this email mean, or what does this text message mean? And so what they're doing is trying to figure out what the easy problem is. They've really conquered the easy problem. They can collect as much information on you, me, or anybody as they want. It's still just this limited brain's ability to categorize, discriminate, and control behavior. Because David Chalmers said, there's a hard problem. Slow down, folks. And I would say the same thing to Ray Kurzweil. Slow down, there's a hard problem here. And the hard problem is subjectivity. In other words, what's it like to be a biological organism? Or to put it simply, what's it like to be me? And I don't care how many of my text messages and emails or whatever you get about me, you still don't know what it feels like to be me. John Mack called it legitimizing the witness. I would call it legitimizing subjectivity, because that's really the next step in consciousness that we're going to try to figure out. Chalmers then has stepped forward and said that consciousness is a fundamental constituent of all reality. In other words, he's on a philosophical basis talking about a conscious universe or a conscious hologram that we all live in. It's really exciting what this man is doing. So that was my academic perspective. And what I found out was there just wasn't much consensus. And there just weren't very many answers. Here I was having all of these amazing journeys of consciousness, amazing extraterrestrial contact, and then I'd go into the academic literature and it wasn't jiving. There was just a disconnect there, until I discovered the very interesting fact that we haven't even had consciousness studies in universities until 1990. Not even 20 years. So of course we're a little bit behind the 8 ball here. So this is something I think that our generation, our children's generation, our grandchildren's generation, we are just going to have liftoff in terms of what consciousness is. And I'm sure in 2 years, or even 1 year or 5 years, I'm going to look back at this talk and say, oh, Rebecca, you just really didn't know much now, did you? But that's okay. I mean, we're all on this journey together, and how exciting this is. So what I did was I decided I needed to have some kind of academic or some kind of intellectual perspective to balance out all of these experiences I kept having. How can I talk about them? How can I understand it? And so I went then to quantum consciousness, and I went into experiential evidence. So in the early 21st century, what's our emerging technology? 0-point energy, quantum consciousness, unlimited mind. And I think that if we look at, for example, what we're working with Edgar Mitchell, we're talking about 0-point technology, anti-gravity for planes, boats, and trains. So this is something that's going to be in our everyday life. And we're going to start to think about our consciousness, about the technology of our coming times. And that's going to be really exciting. So I'm just kind of, that's why I called it peanut butter and jelly, because I'm just beginning to wade into what all this means for how I look at my mind. So the twin pillars are theoretical quantum models and the psychic ability seen as a physical signal, both within and beyond, because we go a lot of different directions, the brain. And I started reading about two gentlemen, Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose. You know, I'm so blessed with working with Lynn and Terry and Larry Lowe's, our web designer that we worked with. And you just get so much energy generated when you work in partnership. And this partnership between Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose is producing some of the most amazing consciousness work that's ever been done, as far as I'm concerned. Stuart Hameroff professionally puts people to sleep. He's an anesthesiologist. He works at University of Arizona in Tucson. And so he started working with the idea of quantum consciousness and what would that mean, and took all this wisdom and knowledge that he had about different levels of consciousness as he would put people to sleep and anesthetize them for surgery. And he began to team up then with Sir Roger Penrose, who was an English mathematician. And so what they've come up with is Stuart is designing the kind of the cell biological piece of quantum consciousness, and Roger Penrose is doing all of the mathematical equations, and they're coming together in these two amazingly torrents of information, feeding it into how can we start to understand what quantum consciousness is. So just briefly, what Stuart Hameroff came up with was this whole microtubules idea, because he needed to find a place. Where inside the brain could I find a quantum process going on? And so within these microtubules, then he said, when quantum bits of information are passed there, that they operate by non-local entanglements. So this is one place that you could look at biologically inside your brain and say that your brain has a verifiable, certifiable quantum behavior going on. So this quantum consciousness then has some principles evolved in it. And of course, you know, we've talked a lot today about the entangled universe. Of course, two particles interacting as waves, which is probability, and the waves join, and the waves get bigger and bigger and bigger. And once you're joined in a wave, then the two particles are no longer separate, but they're forever entangled. And then we have the collapsing of the wave also. The experiments in terms of the entangled universe, the famous ones were at the University of Milan, and they took brain cells and grew them in one petri dish. This is kind of the definitive famous experiment. I'm sure a lot of you have read about it. They grew brain cells in a petri dish. Then they harvested half of those brain cells and they put them in another petri dish and let those grow, and then they separated them by light and distance. They took a laser and they stimulated one set in the petri dish, and the other set responded. Had a similar strong response. And that, you know, led them then to theorize this whole entanglement, quantum entanglement. I think not only are we entangled with the universe, we are entangled with each other. And I have a private practice in hypnotherapy and exoconsciousness coaching and life coaching, and this wonderful young man came to see me the other day, and he had just gotten a promotion. He worked for one of the banks. I hope he still has his promotion because this has been a year or two. But he got a promotion, but he had to fly all the time, and he was deathly afraid to fly. And so I just said to him, you know, well, mostly hypnotherapy is fun because mostly you just get to listen. So I just said, you know, tell me how you feel about flying. And he said, oh my golly. He goes, I am terrified. I said, well, why are you terrified to fly? And he said, well, I'll tell you. The pilots don't get any sleep, and they don't know what they're doing, and their training is minimal. And some of them drink. The mechanics forget it. They totally don't know what they're doing. They're driving around. They're just, you know, patching these airplanes together with duct tape, and that's not safe. And the whole control tower, are you kidding me? Like, they're really going to keep track of all these planes? And he said, and the flight attendants, well, there you go. I looked at him and said, okay, got that right out there. And so I said, well, what is it that you like to do? He goes, oh, boy, I love to ride my motorcycle. I said, oh, you do? Great. Tell me about it. And he goes, man, I got the Arizona highways, and I just pull back on that motorcycle, and I just take off all weekend. I wonder where his wife and kids are, but take off all weekend. So, this is very cool. This is great. And I said, tell me how that feels. And he went on and on about the whole, he goes, I just love the acceleration of that motorcycle. And I let him go on and talk about it. And I looked at him, I said, well, that's really interesting. I said, now, you feel afraid and unsafe on the airplane, and you feel safe on the motorcycle. He goes, oh yeah. And I said, and do you wear a helmet? And he goes, nah, most of the time not. And I said, okay. And I said, well, and then I started listening to things that he might consider being a little bit aware of, the road, the bike itself, the maintenance of the bike, the other motorists. And we kind of talked about that for a while. I goes, oh yeah, I kind of see your point. And so what I did was I just flipped it, and then when I tranced him, we talked a little, actually quite a bit, about the theory of entanglement, because I said, you're entangled with this motorcycle and other motorists in the road just as much as you're entangled up there flying around on that airplane. That's entanglement. You are entangled with the universe here. We talked about that a little bit, and then when I tranced him, boy, on takeoff, it was fun. I just had him pretending like he was on his motorcycle and just pulling back that accelerator, and his plane was just taking right off. And sure enough, he was fine. He called me back a couple months later. He goes, I never had another moment of fear. And I said, well, that's what it's all about. We are entangled. We can get as upset as we want about the military and the government and the black ops programs and this person that has this belief, but you know what? We're all entangled. We can have personal boundaries, but on a quantum level, we're all entangled, and that has huge repercussions for exoconsciousness as far as I'm concerned. Exoconsciousness, we're also in a holographic reality. One of the things that the holographic reality talks about is strings of vibrating energy, or just take the string theory part out and just talk about vibrating energy. One of the things that I work with is having people realize that their body is just energy and information. I'm very, very privileged to work with quite a few holistic docs, and these holistic docs are so evolved. They really get the issue that if you have a physical illness, the doctor can only treat you so far if you have mental issues, if you have emotional issues, mental issues too. But if you have emotional issues, your treatment is only going to go so far. And until you clear out and deal with those emotional issues, you're not really going to have optimal health. And so I deal a lot with people that have chronic diseases, inflammatory diseases, reoccurring cancers, things that kind of people have just sort of given up on, and they work with these holistic doctors, and then they're sent to me, and then I work with their emotional clearing. And so we look at this whole idea of vibrating energy, and when I work with people and I trance them, I just literally have them go into their body and start to talk to their body. And sometimes when they talk to their body, they end up talking to more than their body. For example, I had a young man the other day who had a reoccurring form of cancer, and he came in, and as I heard him talk, he's had so much loss, so much grief, so much just, betrayal and disappointment in his young life. And part of his loss and betrayal had to do with the fact that he lost his beloved father. He just couldn't get over the loss of his father. So I do a lot of medium work, and so I'm sitting there talking to him, and then his father comes in, and so then telepathically I'm talking to his father, I'm talking to him, we're kind of having this session, and I in my office there's a faucet, a water faucet. So we're working, and I have him go in his body, and he's in his body working, and then his father's going, this is a manhood issue. Tell him it's his manhood issue. And so we're kind of talking about what his manhood means to him, and the fact that he doesn't have a father anymore, and how he's trying to figure out this manhood and what it means to be a man. And so during the entire this session that we're having, all of a sudden the faucet turns on. It didn't turn on a little bit, it turns on. And he goes, what's that? And I went, that's your dad. That's your dad. And that faucet ran the entire time that I talked with his father and relayed the messages to him. That father is entangled in that son's holographic universe. Another really interesting thing about the holographic universe is the whole issue of memory. I tell you, memory is an amazing thing. Back in the 1920s, Penfield did some research on memory, and he came up with the idea that memory was located one place in the brain. It was like a book. So, okay, we're going to work on memory, so it's like you're going to pull the memory book off the brain's bookshelf. Okay, it's in one place in the brain. And then later on, I think back into the 50s, then Pembrand started looking at this theory and saying, I don't know if that's so right or not. I don't know if that's really going to hold up. And so he did the famous rat experiment, maybe some of you have heard of, where he took the rats and taught them the maze. And then, I don't like to say this, but subsequently then he began to remove portions of their brain. And the rats still ran the maze. And he took them back out and took out more parts of their brain, and the rats still ran the maze. Until he got to the point where he said, the memory is everywhere. Everywhere in the brain. It's not just one place. And then I started thinking about memory in the holographic universe, and I started thinking about, clients that I work with. Another young man that I was working with, he was having some digestive problems, and he'd had an unhappy marriage and some issues with his children and his ex-wife. And so all of a sudden, we're like in his digestive system's working because he'd had a lot of kind of stomach irritation. And so we're in there working, and all of a sudden, he's not in his stomach anymore. He's in revolutionary France in the 1700s. I'm like, well, okay, where are you? And he said, oh my golly, I'm in the Bastille. I said, well, how did you get in, how did you end up in the Bastille? And so, I regressed him, and we worked back and forth with consciousness, which, your subconscious mind moves beyond time and space. Your subconscious mind moves easily beyond time and space. And he said, I'm sitting in this Bastille, and he said, I've just been brought in from our estate, and he said, I'm part of a family, and we have a very big estate in France, and he said, my whole family just got thrown in the Bastille. And I said, for what? He goes, that's why I'm so upset. He said, we didn't do anything. We got turned in, we got betrayed by some of the servants and the people that worked on this estate, and he said, but we didn't do anything. And now he said, I think they're going to kill me. And I said, okay, so, gently then, I helped to move him to, what's the next significant event in this past life that you're having. And he's then on the gallows, I guess you would call it. He's standing on the gallows, and they're ready to put the noose around his neck, and he looks out over the crowd, and he sees all these people jeering at him, and he sees, some of the servants and some of the guys that worked in the stables and some of the other people that came in from town and worked on the estate, and all of a sudden, he's dead. And when he came back in the room, I just looked at him and I said, well, that was an interesting crowd. Did you recognize anybody? He goes, yeah, I did. Because my ex-wife was right out there jeering at me. And he said, and this kid was over here, and this kid was over here, and my other kid was over here. And I said, oh my golly. I said, you had a whole family reunion this life, didn't you? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, all of them are still betraying me. So where did his memory exist? In his brain? No. In his body? No. Existed in the whole universe. Was he having A past life regression, a present life regression, or a future regression? Was he all three at once? I think probably it was all three at once, because he was beyond the time-space continuum. And when that happens, you're far beyond past, present, future. You're in another area of this hologram that we all live in. You know, a lot of interesting things are being documented by Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona. One of them came to light the other day. I thought of Gary, because we work with Gary some, and I thought of Gary because there was a young man who people were really upset because he committed suicide just recently. I believe he lived in Georgia. Well, the news article went on to say that he had a heart transplant some years ago. And as part of his heart transplant, he decided he was going to go back and find the man who gave him his heart. So he goes and he meets with the family of the man who gave him his heart and falls in love with the man's wife and marries her. Love at first sight, deeply in love with this woman. A few years later, he kills himself. He commits suicide. And the story gets even better because one of the reasons that he got this man's heart, his family's going, he never had a suicidal thought in his life. That isn't who he is. But the man's heart that was in his chest committed suicide. Now, where's the memory? Where's the memory? Is the memory in that man's heart that was transplanted into his chest? What's memory? And if you look at memory, you've got to look at consciousness. It's fascinating. I don't have any answers. I just have good stories. So when we go beyond the time-space continuum, we can really start to experience what it feels like to have a multidimensional mind. That my mind and my consciousness is not limited to what I read in a textbook or what I go to college and learn. My mind is so far beyond that time-space continuum, and I'm living in other dimensions, but I still need to understand what the heck is going on. So we keep reading the textbooks. One of the places that we're trying to figure out what's going on is CERN, which has become an even bigger mystery. CERN was put together, of course, in Switzerland, and we were told that it was going to simulate the Big Bang with these super colliders, and when we simulated the Big Bang, that there was a high probability that we might be able to prove parallel universes. Well, of course, there was a leak at CERN, which has become an even bigger leak because it was supposed to become online, I think, this spring, and now maybe it's going to come online this fall. So it's still up in the air. The one I find really interested is GEO 600. GEO 600 is located south of Hanover, Germany. GEO 600 is looking at gravitational waves, ripples in time-space that are made by neutron stars and black holes. And what did he, Rudy called him last night, MECOs, not black holes, MECOs. So they're looking at MECOs in these gravitational waves, and something astounding has been happening because there's a noise, and they can't figure out where the noise is from. And one of the things that they're speculating is maybe the noise is giving us information about this holographic universe. Well, they must be pretty certain about it because Craig Hogan, the director of Fermilab's Center for Particle Astrophysics, came out and said, if the GEO 600 result is what I suspect it is, then we are all living in a cosmic hologram. Now, I don't know how your mind puts this together, but my mind puts this together and says, well, I guess they got outside the hologram. That's how they figured out that we were in a hologram in the first place. And if there's one hologram, how many holograms are we talking about here? Are we that really cool little Russian toy, you know, the nesting dolls? So is our hologram nesting next to another hologram that's nesting next to another hologram that's nesting next to another hologram? And how do I, because I know in my consciousness I can move through these different holograms, but I also know, like Rudy talked about, every piece of the hologram holds the whole hologram. So how do I go with my conscious mind as I astral travel and I go into these other dimensions? How am I taking remnants of who I am so that I can understand and interpret those other nested holograms that I'm traveling into? There's lots of questions this raises. And probably the biggest question is, what's source in all these holograms? Are they just all floating? Or does it all have a source? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. What are some of the cultural shifts that create exoconsciousness, that put us in touch with the stars? Actually, there was a big shift. When we moved as a civilization from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, we moved from before the Common Era, or BC, to AD, or the Common Era. You know, we don't really have a year zero in our timeline like when we went with 2000. So it just went from before the Common Era to the Common Era, and we jumped over. But the reason that we made that shift was because the leaders of the time decided that the calendar wasn't doing a good job of making our time relevant to what was happening with the stars and the planets and the moon. So they thought that the Gregorian calendar was going to use the moon better and the stars and the planets, so then we would grow crops better. Well, what I think happened was we shifted everybody's perception of time when we shifted calendars. Your idea of time just underwent a radical shift, and it became linked to the stars. I think today an even bigger shift is taking place because we are shifting not only beyond time, we are shifting beyond time and space. So the things that our consciousness can do as an exoconsciousness as we travel and we develop these extraterrestrial-like abilities, astrophysics is coming in and saying, here, just like Rudy did yesterday, here, this is how we're starting to understand this. This is how this experience that you are having is making sense. And so I believe that astronomy is really becoming the way shower for many of us as we try to understand who we are with extraterrestrial contact, as well as who we are as a multidimensional consciousness. In the 1960s, people really got into dropping out. They got into the drug culture. If you look at the drug culture, I don't care if you're taking LSD or any kind of mind-altering drugs, ayahuasca tea, you know, whatever it is, what that does in the 60s, when people were really into drugs, not that they're not also today, mind you, but what it does is whenever you take a mind-altering drug, it puts you in enhanced quantum consciousness. So all of a sudden, you can feel the limitlessness of your mind, and you can get messages from the universe. Now the trick is, how do we do this without living on ayahuasca tea or taking LSD? That's what's happening today. And in the early 21st century then, we're doing more dropping in. And this is what I spend a lot of time writing about in the book. When you drop into your body, then you start paying attention to what you eat, what you drink, the people you're around. You start feeling and living in your body. Most of the people I work with in my practice, most of my clients, I'll say to them, are you in your body? And undoubtedly I'll get a blank stare. They don't know what it means to be in their body, and I can relate to it because probably for the majority of my life I wasn't in my body either. I like that, like right that corner right up there. Most of the time I was hanging around up there all the time. So I didn't know what it meant to be in my body, and I literally had to teach myself to be in my body. And that's what's happening today. But I believe, and I have experienced that as we teach ourselves to be in our bodies, the travel that we can do is beyond anything a drug will ever give us. One of the reasons that I think that we've needed to turn to drugs or needed to be outside our bodies up on that far corner of the room is because we are still a traumatized species. I don't like saying this, but I know for a fact that humans live in a very traumatized society where there's a lot of violence and there's a lot of trauma. And we all sort of, in a way, participate in a very solitary belief system. And we are in, some people talk about solitary lockdown, galactic solitary confinement. We have been taught that we're alone in the universe. And that's a trauma. That's trauma. And we live behind a wall of silence. And everybody in this room has experienced that wall of silence. Don't go out and tell people what you're interested in. Don't go out and tell people that there's another kind of consciousness or another kind of experience available. We live behind that wall of silence. And the wall's coming down. One of my friends, J.K. Scott, just wrote a book called Shades of Truth. I don't know, J.K.'s been coming to this conference for a long time, and she's one of the film judges and just a really, really beautiful being, a beautiful woman, a beautiful friend, and she wrote this book about a science fiction novel about the whole Mayan code. Another person that I like that talks about the Mayan code is Barbara Handclough, and we can all take comfort in the fact that Barbara is telling us that as she reads the Mayan code, that I believe it was 9,300 BC when the catastrophic, when all of the galactic catastrophes happened that put us into solitary confinement, that time of 9,300 BC when we were put in galactic solitary confinement is in fact drawing to an end, thankfully, and that the end of our confinement is near. And that right now, from 2009 to 2010, 12, and folks, that's only 3 years, according to Barbara. In 3 years, we're going to move into a galactic universal society. And we're going to move there because we understand what exoconsciousness is. Not because Obama in his first 100 days declared disclosure. We're going to move to galactic society, and I want to say, I hope he does. We're going to move to a galactic society because we know who we are as exoconscious beings. And we're owning the fact that we have extraterrestrial origins, dimensions that we live in, and extraterrestrial abilities. That's what's going to get us to a galactic society. My daughter got married, and being very independent, she planned her own wedding. And so we had so much fun. We all got together and we went to San Francisco. We had the babies and the grandkids and my daughter and her new husband, and went out to Half Moon Bay and had this gorgeous wedding. And then my daughter goes, "Okay, we're all going to Alcatraz." And I went, "We're going to Alcatraz?" Of course, being a mother, didn't say a word. But the whole time I'm going, okay, whatever. The wedding weekend at Alcatraz. And I was just, it was a blast. We had a great time. We had the babies in the strollers, going up and down the hills, going on the boat. And my daughter and her husband were there. And it was a really fun outing. And then I got back, and about a year later, I saw this picture at Alcatraz Island. And I thought, that's why we went to Alcatraz Island. Because we went to Alcatraz Island to seed it with all that love that our family had. And that island's being seeded today with love as a global peace center by the Native Americans and the people of San Francisco. So what is full of trauma and fear can be transformed into something with peace and love. So what is all this trauma about, and how does it affect our exoconsciousness? One of the first people that talked a lot about the trauma as an experiencer, that an experiencer goes through is, of course, John Mack. He went through over 200 cases of experiencers, moved them through really rigorous psychiatric tests, and came back to the medical and the psychiatric community and say, hey folks, these guys are all sane. Nothing wrong with them. They passed all the tests. But what John did find was, in order for these people to move from contact into what he called transformation, which he called a spiritual transformation, that first thing they had to do was fence that fear. They had to get a hold of that trauma and fear and fence it. Then they could move into transformation. It's like step 1, step 2. So what happens when a person is traumatized and they've had contact? What happens when a person has lived a really traumatic childhood, or been in a really traumatic marriage, or been hit by a car, or been in a car wreck, or been in Vietnam, or been in Afghanistan or Iraq? What happens when that person that's experienced a lot of trauma in their brain has extraterrestrial contact? Unfortunately, what happens is they usually view the contact through the lens of the trauma. You know, they joke about the beer goggles. We got trauma goggles. Unfortunately, we have trauma goggles, and we view our contact through our trauma scars. So, I have been so blessed to work with 3 men. I call them the traumatology trio. Dr. Robert Scare, I know. What a great name. Dr. Robert Scare works with trauma. Dr. Robert Scare believes that all human psychopathology and disease is rooted in trauma. I'm going to say it again. Dr. Scare believes that all psychopathology and disease is rooted in trauma. That's a big order. What he means by that is, he says that if you've had, a virus, what I think he means is that if you have a virus or a bacteria or a genetic propensity, you can write those things and be okay and get healthy again. If you have trauma, that trauma scar is going to have a huge impact on your health. And so he began to study polar bears. And he did these experiments with polar bears where they were out on the ice, and these polar bears were traumatized. And the polar bears that were allowed to shake during the trauma or after the trauma, they got better and thrived. The polar bears that were put into confinement and paralyzed died. So, in comes Lee Gerdes. Lee Gerdes lives in my neighborhood. He's my neighbor. He's such a cool guy. I met Lee Gerdes for coffee one day, and he gave me 2 CDs. The first DVD was Dr. Scare, and the second DVD was all about something that Lee invented called brain states technology. And I looked at that brain states technology DVD. I was sitting at home in my living room, and this little girl comes on the DVD of brain states technology. She's about 10 years old, maybe 9. And she can't get a word out of her mouth. And I looked at that little girl, and I don't cry much, but I looked at that little girl and I just sobbed, because for much of my childhood, I was that little girl. I could not get words out of my mouth. My mother used to put me in a car. I grew up in West Virginia. My mother used to put me in a car and drive me to West Virginia University to go to the speech therapist so I could start talking. Finally, I outgrew it. But then in college, it came back again. I couldn't even answer the telephone in college. I couldn't talk. It was all trauma. It was all trauma-based. And I knew when I looked at that little girl, I thought, I got to go to brain states. Got to go to brain states. So David Berceli's the third one, and I'll talk a little bit more about brain states and what I went through. David Berceli's the third in the trauma trio. David Berceli is an angel. I don't know how else to say it. David Berceli gathers up all these veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq and all over the world and puts them in a warehouse and teaches them how to shake. It's so great. He puts them in these yoga positions, and if you've ever done yoga, you know when you first do yoga, it's really hard on your body and you start shaking. My son, so macho, he goes, "Mom, I'm going to yoga with my sister." I said, "Oh, that's totally cool. You'll have a blast." He goes, "It's going to be a piece of cake. I lift weights." I said, "Okay, sweetheart. Call me. Let me know how it goes." I knew I got the call. "Mom, I can't move." I said, "I know it's tough, isn't it?" He goes, "I'm shaking all over." And so he puts these veterans in these yoga exercises, and then they start shaking, and they literally shake loose their trauma. And he sends them home with a whole protocol. Go home and shake. Your wife and family are going to be grateful that you went home and shook. You know, John Mack really only had to fence the fear. We have 3 guys that are telling us all about trauma in amazing ways. What John Mack had was the talking cure. And I think the talking cure does work. I mean, in psychology and whatever, talking cures work. But the shaking cure and the brain states cure works on a different level. How does this brain scarring happen? According to these traumatologists, there's 2 kinds of trauma. There's abandonment and attack. Those are the 2 main forms of trauma. If you're attacked, like some of my clients, I deal a lot in trauma, of course, because I experienced it and worked through it, and I share it with others. But if you're attacked from the back, like I've had some clients that were literally molested as children, and they were attacked from the back and they never saw it happen. If you're attacked from the back and never see it happen, that's the worst form of trauma. What happens is your brain goes right up and makes a scar when that trauma happens. And that scar stays there because your brain doesn't care that scar's there. It just wants you to live and survive. So it makes that scar so it'll stay there so that you will survive. And so then you go on through life, and maybe you see a traumatic movie, or maybe you marry an abusive partner, or maybe you get hit by a car, or maybe, as happened to Lee Gerdes in Brain States, he said, from behind's the worst. The second worst is something that happens immediate. He was hit by a gang with a baseball bat and almost beaten to death. But he said, "You know, Rebecca, it was, I saw it happen. Baseball bat going to hit my head, baseball bat going to hit my head, baseball bat going to hit my head." So his body kind of got ready. So that scar wasn't as deep as it would have been if he would have been attacked from behind. So our brain makes these scars, and what they found out is they can literally lay out a blueprint of all the scars in your brain and tell you what kind of diseases you're going to get. It's amazing. And they can help rewire your neural network, or you can shake it, a new neural network, and create a new neural network beyond these trauma scars. So brain balancing is the whole point of brain states. It's where you balance your brain. And it relieves emotional and physical suffering and disease. It rewires literally and creates a new neural network in your brain. And it is a high optimum health. So what are the keys to making a balanced brain? And if you think about it, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, well, that's really interesting because, you know, we have a bicameral mind. We have a left and right hemisphere. And he said, most of the ETs don't. And I went, yeah, you're right. What if all of this research and experimentation and health that we're getting through things like brain states and dealing with trauma, with the other thing that makes you shake is laughter. Remember Norman Cousins told everybody to laugh? Well, when you laugh, you shake. And it is another way to break trauma is laughter. Or through laughter or through yoga and different body moves. What if that's happening is we're going to move to a unified brain? Because a balanced brain is a unified brain. What if that's where we're going? And the ETs knew all along, And that's why they download people like Lee Gerdes with this information. So the balanced brain is based on the sympathetic. So the sympathetic is the right side of your brain. That's kind of the fight or flight, the fear, the trauma, I'm going to be attacked. The parasympathetic is the left hemisphere of the brain. That's kind of pulling back and being a little bit paralyzed and isolated. There's one guy that, one young man that Lee Gerdes talks about, and he's having an issue with addiction. And so they talk to him and they say to his mother, who's bringing him in, I guess, and they say to the man and his mother, well, you know, he's got this brain pattern that's showing up in our brain scans, and, you know, he must have had some kind of parasympathetic occurrence in his life because he has so much trauma here on the left side of his brain. She goes, no, nothing. They ask him, he said, no, nothing. Well, you know, bless their hearts, they go through the brain states anyway because the guy's got a pretty severe addiction problem. One day, midway, the mom walks in, she goes, oh yeah, she goes, I thought of something. I don't know if this applies or not. And they said, yeah, what is it? She goes, well, it's real funny. She goes, you know, when I was carrying him in my womb, I was about 7 or 8 months pregnant, and I got rushed to the hospital. And in the emergency room, they thought that I was due because I was kind of big. And so she said they started giving me, is it Pitocin or whatever? Yeah, it's so good to have a doctor as a friend. So they were giving her Pitocin to have her deliver. Well, she said all of a sudden, my doctor comes in, my OBGYN comes in and goes, stop, you know, get her off that Pitocin. She is not ready to deliver. It's going to be, you know, 2 or 3 months before she has this baby. So they pull the Pitocin in, and she goes, now that you mentioned it, Lee, when we did did MRIs or whatever and looked at this baby, she goes, the baby was all wound up and back against the back of my uterus, scared to death. Parasympathetic scarring in utero. That is huge. That's huge. So we experience trauma all kinds of places in our lives. So what are some of the symptoms? So if you've had attack trauma, these are some of the things that you might have. Panic attacks. I can raise my hand to all these. Panic attacks, anger outbursts, chronic anxiety, hypertension, I don't have high cholesterol, but heart disease, strokes, diabetes, you know. That was me. I don't have any of the, you know, severe things, but I had anger. You know, I had anger issues. I had panic attacks. I had chronic anxiety. Here's parasympathetic dominance. The little boy that was in the uterus. Chronic guilt and shame. Depression. If you have an addict in your family, read down this list. I bet there'll be some lights will come on. A lot of addiction is sourced over here. Chronic guilt and shame, depression, weight gain, dizziness, low blood pressure, diarrhea, diabetes, type 2, asthma, autism, Alzheimer's. It's quite amazing. This is the brain before brain states. And this is what you go through. Some of the trauma release exercises, some of the trauma release sounds. When I went to brain states, I went the first time. Terry and Lynn were with me. We went kind of through the whole thing. And it was rough. It was really rough. So then I got done with my first 10 sessions, and Lee emailed me or called me and said, you know, Rebecca, how you doing? I said, I'm not doing well. He goes, I know you're coming back. I said, I know. So go right back in for my next 10 sessions. Well, every time you go in, they go through this whole protocol where they wire you up and they look at your brain. And so the second time I go, I say, hey, you know, just out of curiosity, what's my first chart look like? You know, can you compare the two and give me some feedback? Some young clinician there, and he goes, yeah, sure, I'd be glad to do that. When he comes back later, he's got this really sheepish look on his face. He goes, well, I'm really supposed to do this, but since you ask, I'll do it. And I said, okay, what did it say? And he goes, well, we have this one marker that we give, and when you come in, if you score below a 10, we immediately send you to your doctor. I said, yeah? He goes, you were an 8. He said, we don't do that anymore. But that's how far gone I was when I went to brain states. I was an 8. And I had sympathetic issues going on here. He said, but the good news is, when I retested you the second time, you're at like a 46. So he said, after we're done with this session of brain states, I'm sure you're going to be like up in the 80s. So that was very cool. Trauma release via sounds, what they do is they hook up your brain with electrodes. And then they work with different areas of your brain, and they give you meditations to do or visualizations. And then they just shower your brain with computer sounds. And you just release, remove, release, and resolve, and let go. And I want to tell you, before I went through this, I had done years of work. I knew every body worker in town. I knew every hypnotherapist in town. I'd done the hypnotherapy course. I am a hypnotherapist. I'd done the back and forth eye thing. I'd done everything. And I still went to brain states and I scored an 8. So this is after. So let's go back up. This is before. Just kind of look at the blue. And this is after. It kind of smooths out. Let's talk a little bit about DNA. The magic DNA. Of course, junk DNA. Everybody in the field of energy medicine likes to talk about junk DNA. That 3% of the DNA mysteriously codes the genetic material, and the other 95%, 97% we can't figure out what it does. One of the things that junk DNA does, though, is that it does exhibit some kind of phantom effect. The phantom effect is tied to these transposons and that are able to jump chromosomes. Well, in science, we can look at the activity of these transposons as they jump chromosomes to look at when people have cancer or disease, that they get sicker and sicker because of this chromosome jump. And now some scientists are looking at it and turned around going, well, now if we can do that for cancer, gee, you suppose we can do that for people who meditate or people that have extraterrestrial experiences? What's happening to those transposons in terms of jumping their chromosomes? Are they changing their DNA? And then, of course, there is the phantom effect of DNA. DNA really does have an effect on things. They did that famous experiment when they took the DNA, the genetic material, and they put it in a vacuum. And then they put some DNA and just the genetic material in a vacuum. Just, it had a random pattern to it. Then they put the DNA on top of it, and another pattern emerged. Then they took the DNA out, and yet another pattern emerged. So they were hypothesizing from that the DNA definitely does have a very, very intense impact. So DNA is having a big impact in the court system, forensics, medicine. Who's your daddy? Who's your mommy? It's a built-in lie detector test, or as I like to say, I think DNA is our built-in truth serum. And I think a lot of the truth concerning our ET ancestry and origins is going to come from the Genome Project, if we're ever given the information. And I think one of the reasons we might be given the information is because a lot of people are looking now at the DNA. In 1954, Sir Francis Crick talked about the double helix of DNA and what that all meant. And what sprung up as a result of his work is that we all inherited a DNA dogma, kind of like a church dogma, but we have a DNA dogma. We believe that biological information begins with genes in a DNA command center, that when the genes give a command, the biological systems listen, and that biology always trumps environment. So if your doctor does a gene test on you and your mother had breast cancer or your father had lung cancer, look out. That's the DNA dogma. But what they found when they had the Genome Project was that there were 100,000 proteins that needed to be encoded. So they were figuring in the Genome Project, okay, 100,000 proteins, we're going to need at least, to do the work, 120,000 genes in the Genome Project. That's what they speculated. Guess what? They only found 23,000. So how do you account for this discrepancy? Possibly, what's doing the work that was needed for these 120,000 genes in the body is the entire human organism cooperating, atoms, molecules, cells, and tissues. And then this guy, Bruce Lipton. Has some of you read Bruce Lipton? Bruce Lipton comes off on the scene and starts talking about biology of belief. I love the title of his book. He talks about biology of belief. And he believes that genes are activated and deactivated by the environment inside and outside the body, and that the mind experiences these signals as emotions. And emotions form our belief system. If you have an emotion about something, you're going to have a belief about it. You're going to form a belief about it. That's how our minds work. And so what Bruce Lipton is hypothesizing is that the traditional genetic evolution took thousands of years to happen, and that when you change your belief system, I mean, when you look back 5 years ago, how much has your belief system changed in only 5 years? I can tell you mine has radically changed, radically. And Bruce Lipton would say, as my belief system changed, my DNA changed. And all of us have been running around in UFO circles and extraterrestrial circles and experiencer groups and energy medicine groups and healing groups and saying, DNA changes, DNA changes. And now, God bless Bruce Lipton, he comes up, writes books about it, and talks about the fact that belief changes our biology. You know, when they say, is disclosure going to happen within the first 100 days of the Obama administration? I hope it does. I hope that John Podesta was, leading us into that happening. But I always go back to John Lear. There will be no total disclosure anytime soon. The ETs are doing this on a one-to-one basis. Every time I read that quote, I think about Bruce Lipton. If you want someone to change their DNA, you need to give them an emotional experience. Fright, love, whatever the emotion is, fear, emotional experiences change your DNA. How brilliant of the ETs. They are changing our DNA, one person at a time, with our belief systems. Dr. Lynn talks a lot about what happened with her and the Phoenix Lights and my friend Terry and certainly my dear friend Ruth Hover. People talk about ET experiences, whether they're crafts or visitations or reading a book or going to a movie. They talk about them like it happened to them personally. ET experience are personal. It is subjective. I love where UFOs, this is just a quote I found somewhere. This woman was driving by the bowling alley in some little Canadian town, and here's a UFO over here in the ditch. But notice what she says. I was surprised to see a light there, but I know it was real. Yet somehow I felt emotionally involved and wondered if maybe it all had something to do with me personally. Gee, suppose her DNA's changing? You suppose in the split second that Bruce Lipton talked about, she was reaching exoconsciousness? She was immediately put into another state of being, elevated, however you want to talk about it. So what does make an exoconsciousness belief system? My exoconsciousness belief system is that my consciousness is within my body. Not just my brain, it's within my body. And as I go dropping more and more into my body, I get more and more in touch with what it means to be in touch with the life force of my body. Remember when I told you about that young man that I was trancing and his father came in and said, tell him it's about his manhood? What's the first thing that the churches took away from us? Oh, after our money. I have a religious background, so I'm allowed to say that. What's the first thing they took away from us? Sex. Sex. Your sex is your life force. Your sex is your life force. Your kundalini, the Hindus talk about the kundalini, tantra. Your sexuality is your life force. If you want to reach extraterrestrial consciousness, you need to be in touch with your life force of your body, because it's what ties you to the extraterrestrial world. And consciousness is beyond our brain. Consciousness is in that nesting hologram on top of nesting hologram on top of nesting hologram on top of nesting hologram, and I don't know where it's sourced. I just know that it probably is sourced. I feel comfortable with that. That feels good in my stomach when I say that. The universal mud of the conscious universe, that's what proto-consciousness is. That's the thing that David Chalmers came up with. Remember David Chalmers? Easy problem, hard problem consciousness. David Chalmers also came up with the idea, and other people have talked about it, of proto-consciousness. And according to David Chalmers, he's so great. Consciousness is a fundamental building block of reality. How cool is that? How cool that finally, in the 1990s, we have degree programs of consciousness. How cool that eventually, in the 2000s, we're going to have degree programs in ufology, in exopolitics, and exoconsciousness. So consciousness is like spin, mass, and location. It's a physical law of the universe. This is a conscious universe. So what are some of these exoconscious abilities? And people have talked a lot about that, especially today on the Experiencer Day, and I'm just going to talk a little bit more about it. Downloads. Downloads are really important. Pay attention to downloads. I've gotten downloads in a lot of different ways. It seemed like it kind of went through different phases in my adulthood in terms of my downloads. There was one point where I would just kind of sit in my living room and the orbs would just start manifesting all over my living room, just visible orbs manifesting. And then I would go to bed at night, and sometimes they'd wake me up at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd see them over in the corner of my bedroom, and they come and spin over my head, and they squeal just like dolphins. It's so cool. So I know when the squeals start that I was getting downloaded with information. Another type of download that I have, and I don't really know if anybody's talked too much about it here today, but I went through a period where I would lie in my bed at night and I'd look up at the ceiling, and literally the ETs would push through three-dimensional symbols out of the ceiling, and I would sit there and remember what the symbols meant. And every night I would lie in bed and more symbols would come down through the ceiling, helping me remember. It's kind of like I was giving the extraterrestrial vernacular, and it wasn't the King James Version, but it was coming down into... I like people that get religious jokes. It comes down through the ceiling. It was like an alphabet, but it was all symbols, and I understood what they meant. And then the third way, kind of when I went through those phases, and then eventually I just got really in touch with the fact that I'd be doing yoga or cooking dinner, or usually not cooking dinner. I'd be doing yoga or whatever, and all of a sudden I just get the message, okay, you're going to get a download. Hold still. And I'd hold still, and you can literally see the energy of the download come into your body. You can literally see those like little snowflakes of energy coming into your body. My first contact really started when I was very, very, very young. I have memories of being in something called the Young People's Project back in the mid-50s, the Young People's Project. And then I hear Michael Salla talk about what was going on then, and I'm like, oh, wow. I lived in West Virginia. I don't know. I guess they had a satellite campus in West Virginia. But I was taken on board, and I was instructed, and I was told I was going to work with Dr. Lynn and Terry and a lot of other people. And I had a mentor, and I had instruction, and it was quite an amazing time. One of the most amazing things is that I was sharing with Rudy that I have very, very vivid memories of standing in that ship and being told that I could take the controls, but the controls were right here in my mind, that my consciousness navigated that craft. And I think that's something that conscious navigation of craft and time travel is what we're moving to in that next step, because our consciousness can navigate that travel. The other thing I learned how to do when I was on that craft was to take symbols and make them into technology. So I take a symbol and manifest it into a real thing. And I can remember when I was I went to seminary for 3 years, and I can remember when I went to seminary and I kept wanting to read like Paul Tillich and Paul Ricoeur and anybody that would talk about symbols. I was fascinated by it. Carl Jung. I just wanted to learn about symbols all the time. And I thought religion and mythology, that holds all the symbology of our world. So another exoconscious ability is health, and using ETI frequencies to create health. One of the things that we notice as we work with experiencers is people's lives really do, as John Max says, that, you know, once you fence that fear, that life changes. People go into peace, like Terry. People like Edgar Mitchell, they go into alternative forms of technology. Like Lynn, they go into education. People go into, you know, their whole life takes a different turn at that point. I don't know if any of you remember seeing that DVD by Mary Rodwell from Australia, where she brings in Adrian Veer and he talks about healing people with ETs. Some of you seen that? He was here once? Very cool. Yeah, he's since passed over. But yeah, Adrian was so cool. I remember watching that video, and Adrian's going on and on and on about how, you know, he's got this clinic, this multi-dimensional clinic, and he's healing people with ETs. And so, man, I saw that movie, I got on the phone, I called this healer I work with, and I'm like, Jenny, I just saw this movie. I'm doing this, and I think you are too. And she goes, yeah, I am. So when I work with people, I work with an ETI portal. I work with my star beings, and I work with your star beings. And I bring in those energies, and I work with them, and I'm told what to do and how to do it, and it's an amazing process. So anywhere I work, I just create that portal. So this whole extraterrestrial reality in terms of manifestation, how do we manifest this extraterrestrial reality? How do we get these new neural networks and create a new mind, body, and spirit? As I share with you, I went to seminary, and I really liked the work that I believe his name, Lawrence Gardner, talked about when he was talking about Egypt and during the early Hebraic traditions and Egypt, and he said, worship doesn't mean what we think it means. Worship means, in the early Hebraic tradition and the Egyptian tradition, worship means workshop. So, what my hope in my heart is that someday religions will become again workshops. Because I'm signing up for learning how to transfigure. Remember when Jesus transfigured? I think, you know, I don't care if it's Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad or you know, His Holiness, whomever. The issue isn't them, the issue's us. We're supposed to go to the workshop and learn how to do these things. That's the point of everything. Not to worship, we're supposed to work. We're supposed to figure it out. We're supposed to experience things. We're supposed to take 101 and 202 and 303. But remember during this transfiguration, I think it's the coolest thing. Jesus goes up on the mountain with Peter, James, and John, and he goes, watch this. And his entire molecular form changed right in front of them. And he became a light body and flanked by Elijah and Moses. And then he comes back out of the light body and he looks at them and goes, you can do this too. So if we want to time travel or we want to teleport, my friend Terry drove up here. She goes, I just knew I was going to teleport from Phoenix to Laughlin. You know, we need to go to Transfiguration 101. It's possible for us as ET beings to transfigure our body in another molecular form. It just is. It's possible. And we can bilocate and we can time travel when we do this, and we can teleport. So other exoconscious abilities are astral, interdimensional, out of body, near death. I got books and taught myself how to astral travel. I wanted to astral travel at will. So I thought, I'll just get a book and teach myself how to do it. And you can do that. You can make your own workshop. If your church doesn't want to have the workshop for you, you can make your own workshop, which is what I did. Another place I travel is in the underworld. I've been in the underworld since I was a child. I don't really remember the first time I went into the underworld, but I have very vivid recollections of going under and popping back out. And I'm very experienced in the underworld and very comfortable actually in the underworld. And I even got more comfortable in the underworld when I started reading all the Egypt literature, and I realized that in Egypt they talked about there's two ways to get to the stars. And both ways you got to go through the underworld. You can either go with a group, a church, an experiencer group, a UFO group, whatever, a cult, or you can go by yourself. I personally chose to go through the underworld by myself as my way to the stars. And it's doable. It's not scary. It's something that each and every one of you can do, because the underworld belongs, it is part of this whole hologram beneath our earth dimension. It's the world beneath our feet. And what that experience and being in the underworld has taught me to a great extent is that my belief system that is created, remember, by my emotions create my belief system. My belief system anchors me to earth with cords of invisible energy. It's like I am standing on top of the tree of life that's deep inside the earth. And I can be in touch with that. And when I work with clients, that's one of the things I do, because many experiencers who come and see me, they don't want to be here. Planet Earth, no thanks. They don't want to be on planet Earth. So that's one of the first things I do. We open those portals at the bottom of their feet and make them feel safe on planet Earth. So the underworld is safe. Many of us do astral travel, traveling to extra dimensions of travel, traveling back to our galactic homes, whether it's on a craft or just free floating in the galaxies. Another thing I came across is exoconsciousness as an eighth intelligence. I was so excited. I remember in 1983, my son was born, and I remember being so excited about John Gardner's new book because I was so tired of intelligence tests. And God bless John Gardner at Harvard. He finally stood up and said, there's so many more intelligences than logical mathematical intelligence that are tested with in our intelligence tests. There's linguistic intelligence. There's spatial intelligence. I got to tell the story about spatial intelligence because my little grandson, he's so cute. He was in first grade, he's having a little bit of trouble reading, like a lot of first graders do. So I went to visit him, and it was in another state, and so I had to take him to an appointment. So he got done with the appointment. It was really good. And then he looked at me and he goes, "Grandma Becky, can we go to Toys R Us?" And I went, "Well, sweetheart, I don't know where Toys R Us is." And it was, "You don't even live in this town." I had to use MapQuest to get here. It's 15 or 20 miles from where you live. He goes, "Well, I know where it is." I said, "Oh, you do?" He goes, "Yeah, just drive straight up the street, Grandma. I'll show you right where Toys R Us is." Sure enough, that little angel took me right to Toys R Us and got right in my pocket and bought him a toy. That's spatial intelligence. Body kinesthetics, that's why we pay big bucks to these football players and tennis players, because they know how to move their body through space. Interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, musical intelligence, and I would submit an eighth intelligence. And I think I'm going to write a book on this. I think this is going to be my next book. Exoconsciousness, your eighth intelligence. Because your eighth intelligence is your psychic intelligence. It's that cord that connects you to all of these different nesting holograms and realities. What do people with psychic IQs show? sensitivities to energy and some vibrations, and I bet if I ask people in this room how sensitive you are on a continuum of 1 to 10, 10 meaning that you're highly sensitive, where would you put, which number would you give yourself? 8? 10? Usually when I have clients, I say, oh, I think you're about a 12. You're about a 12. I bet everybody in this room is about a 12 or 15. Off the charts in sensitivity. We learn with intuition. We're the ones that watch stuff on television and intuitively sit there and go, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Or somebody will say something to us and we'll go, not buying it. Or it really does resonate with us and we say, yeah, I do buy it. I do believe this. We learn with intuition, and our tools are all our psychic abilities, our extraterrestrial abilities. Our psychic intelligence is our exoconsciousness. Telepathy, being a medium, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, precognition, remote viewing, on. Those are exoconsciousness. Those are extraterrestrial-like abilities. Those belong in the 8th intelligence. Can you imagine an IQ test for the 8th intelligence? Star school here on Earth. So how do we move from a traumatized brain and psychopathology to an extraterrestrial reality? Culture still defines psychopathology and the experiencers as a psychopath. I still get calls from psychiatrists that talk about I just can't handle these people. I don't know what to do with them. I don't know what to say with them. They're crazy. I was at a party not a couple years ago, and I was actually talking to a psychiatrist. He asked me what I did. I told him. He said, well, you're a paranoid schizophrenic. I can't even say it. Don't even want to say it. I said, oh, it's a lovely party. Thank you for asking me. So cultural acknowledgement of an extraterrestrial reality. The experiencer is seen as sane and normal. I had the wonderful opportunity to talk to the American Psychiatric Association, actually at one of their annual meetings, and get this, they let me talk about psychopathology and exoconsciousness. Fun. Well, it was really fun until I got up there and I was doing my paper, and I kept getting these blank stares, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to let's go off paper for a while here. And so I started just talking about, what I did, and threw out terms like remote viewing and, different things about ufology, different things about the historical timeline of ufology. And I said, have you heard of remote viewing? Blank. Something about ufology? Blank. History? Blank. Folks, we got a lot of work to do here. A lot of work. The body of knowledge that we have to share. We're talking about bringing people up to speed that don't have the vocabulary. So one of the things I did when I wrote my book was, number one, I wanted to make it accessible to everybody, and so I put a glossary in the back. Because we need a vocabulary. Oh, the other thing I did when I was there, I thought it was pretty ingenious. All these psychiatrists were, and it was interesting. It was philosophers and psychiatrists, which was very interesting. And so these psychiatrists, many of them were complaining about the fact that they'd gone to med school all these years and they really wanted to be a clinician. Especially two women that really stood out in the crowd. They said, they were just bemoaning the fact that they were just a pharmacy. They were pharmacologists. They were dispensing meds, and they had all this training. They wanted to be clinicians. They wanted to be doing what I'm doing. And so finally I looked at them and I said, it's really interesting. How are we ever going to get experiencers to be seen as sane and normal? And they went, I don't know. And I said, well, I started doing some creative thinking out of the box. I said, well, how'd you do it with homosexuality? And this one guy looks at me and goes, oh, we took a vote. Wow, what a stroke of brilliance. Who wants to sign up? I got a sign-up sheet out here for the American Psychiatric Association. We're going to go lobby the next meeting. You want to come? So they can take a vote. It may take a few decades of lobbying, or a few years, or a few minutes, who knows? So how do we develop this extraterrestrial reality? Step one, view your reality. That is exopolitics. View your reality. That is exopolitics. It requires open access to information. It requires acknowledgement. It requires support to use your intuition and speak the truth. Step 2, this is a toughie. Embrace and love your shadow. Because you, me, everybody in this room, as long as we have lived in violent, traumatic cultures, we have played the role of both victim and perpetrator. One of the most difficult things that I had to do in my life was when I moved through all the removal, release, and resolve of my trauma, and I had to go to my children and apologize for colluding with violence and abuse in their life. And not only did I apologize, but I said, this is never going to happen in our family again. No more secrets, no more collusion, because secrets are colluding. And that requires a lot of compassion for myself, and for my children to listen to that. Step 3, release the trauma scar. I don't care if you laugh, if you do yoga, if you go to brain states, release those trauma scars out of your brain. Our brain doesn't need to have those trauma scars in it. Go to the comedy section of Blockbuster and sit around every night and laugh. However you want to accomplish it. That requires a lot of forgiveness. That requires not taking ourselves so seriously, which I'm really good at. That requires releasing all of that collusion. So what do we release? This is pretty big stuff here, folks. We're going to remove, release, and resolve secrecy, because we're not going to collude anymore. We're going to create an extraterrestrial reality of open information. We're going to remove, release, and resolve the belief in mortality. And we're going to create an extraterrestrial reality of immortality. We're going to remove, release, and resolve the need to have a master liberator. We can go hand in hand with that hand of God. And we're going to create ourselves as the creator in the extraterrestrial reality. We're going to remove, release, and resolve the need to objectify everything and question our gut. And we're going to become experiential and intuitive in our extraterrestrial reality. We're going to remove, release, and resolve isolation, finally. And in our extraterrestrial reality, we're going to become entangled and engaged. And that means a lot of compassion and a lot of care and gentleness. We're going to remove, release, and resolve being traumatized. And we're going to create an extraterrestrial reality of a balanced brain and a peaceful society. We're going to remove, release, and resolve being so anthropocentric, I can't say it, human-centered. And we're going to create a reality of being an extraterrestrial. It's a pretty heavy order. But you know what? For most people in this room, we already live on this side of the screen. We've already created that extraterrestrial reality. We just keep having to remind each other and ourselves that it's happening. Step 4. After you've removed, released, and resolved, we create a new reality. And that requires the ability to let go and receive. Just like when I went to Hilo and I was going to write that book on exoconsciousness. And I took my outline with me and all my intellect and all my ego. And I got there and breathed in a day or two of the aloha spirit, and something else manifested in that book. So you really develop the ability to let go and receive. And that again requires exopolitics and exoconsciousness. And part of the movement within exopolitics is wanting something to happen, seeing it happen, and then just relaxing and accepting the fact that it's already happening. We're already in an age of disclosure. We already have acknowledgement. Does that mean the work's done? Far from it. But we're already there. So please, I loved hearing all of your stories all week. Please bring your stories to me and bring the books and whatever you want to share with me. I can't tell you enough about how much that means to me. I'm thinking about doing the Exoconsciousness and Examiner, or Exopolitics, one or the other, but I'd like to do exopolitics from an exoconsciousness slant. I think there's a lot that we need to be sharing with the world. So please, you know, pick up one of my cards there, email me anything that you would like to see written about, or if you want to write about it, we can co-author it, you know, however you want to do it. But please, I'm open for information, and it's been a delight to do this. Thank you. Thank you.
Rebecca.